We were on a reservation in North Dakota. Steve Smith, Alan Henderson, Dikembe, and me. Dikembe asked one of the chiefs at the tribal council, could we ride horses while we're here? He said, sure, no problem at all. Dikembe jumps up on his horse. He's got a cowboy hat on. What are you guys worried about? There's nothing to this. We're inside of a corral, fortunately. He kicks his horse. The horse takes off running around the corral. Dikembe drops the reins totally and is yelling, stop, stop, slides off the back of the horse and falls into the fence. Fortunately, doesn't get hurt. But as that's happening, I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, we're losing our all-star center to a horseback accident.
And you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
So I'll get goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Strand, you make the pass, yes. Christian, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
Welcome to episode 144. Thanks for tuning in. I'm excited to be joined by Pete Babcock, a man deeply woven into the fabric of NBA history. Pete shares the innovative path that he took to break into the league, starting as a volunteer scout and rising through the ranks as a regional scout, assistant coach, director of player personnel, VP of basketball operations, general manager, team president, and even minority owner. We explore Pete's passion for Black history and humanitarian work and reflect on a remarkable 42-year career that culminated in an NBA championship ring in 2016. This conversation serves as the perfect introduction to Pete's forthcoming biography, Courts of Justice, A Life in Basketball and Activism. You can pre-order the book now at petebabcock.com. There's also a link to purchase in the show notes. In our chat, Pete offers a behind-the-scenes look at the art of scouting and drafting and the complexities of navigating trades, including the high-profile deal that sent franchise favourite Dominique Wilkins from the Atlanta Hawks to the LA Clippers. We cover Pete's tenure with several NBA franchises, including the New Orleans Jazz, Milwaukee Bucks, San Diego Clippers, Denver Nuggets, Atlanta Hawks, Toronto Raptors, and Cleveland Cavaliers, discussing his roles and impact at each stop. Along the way, we talk about a wide range of players he worked with or observed closely, including Paul Westphal, Alvan Adams, Tom Chambers, Terry Cummings, Fat Lever, Christian Laettner, Dikembe Mutombo, Steve Smith, J.R. Ryder, and many more. Pete will return in a future episode to take us deeper into the making of his book. Show notes for this episode and access to a huge archive of past episodes are available at inallairness.com. Now, onto the show. My guest today is a former NBA executive with a wealth of experience across 8 franchises dating back to the 1970s. He may have the most fascinating and varied career of anyone I've ever had on the show. Pete Babcock, thanks for joining me.
It's my pleasure, Adam. Great to talk to you.
I'm looking forward to it. You were born in Bangor, Maine in 1949, and your family moved when you were just 2. I read that you graduated from Phoenix's Maryvale High School in 1967. Did your family move directly from Maine to Arizona, or were there other stops along the way?
No, there were many stops in between. My dad was in the Air Force, so we lived from one base to another. We went from Bangor, Maine to Manchester, New Hampshire for 6 months, to the state of Washington, Moses Lake, Washington. There was an air base there, and one of my brothers was born there, Rob. Then we were there 2 years. Then we moved to Nashville, Tennessee, an Air Force base. We were there for 2 years. Syracuse, New York for 1 year. Colorado Springs, Colorado for 5 years, where my youngest brother Dave was born, and then to Phoenix. When you're in a military family, you move frequently. My parents did a great job of making every move like an adventure for us. It was always looked at as being something fun, something interesting. I would say from Tennessee to Syracuse, New York, Carl Springs, I remember those really well.
Now, you're the eldest of the three Babcock boys. Your brothers, as you mentioned, Rob, 3 years younger, and Dave, I believe, is 9 years younger than you. Sadly, Rob passed away in 2019. You each graduated from Maryvale High School. What were the sporting battles like on your home's driveway in Phoenix, Pete?
Well, they were pretty intense. We had a basket out in the driveway over the garage, these metal garage doors. We beat them up so badly that my dad refused to replace them until we retired from playing. So they were all dented up and they were a mess. They really were. Sadly for him and for my mom, because both brothers ended up in the NBA also, but as all three of us would be at different places, we would bring our families back to my parents' house every Christmas for at least a couple of days. And we'd renew our one-on-one championship series battles. I don't know how old we were when we finally stopped, but we probably should have stopped a few years earlier than we did. But finally, my dad replaced the doors when we gave up playing.
That's a great story. During this time in the 1960s, you're a Boston Celtics fan, possibly because of the links to New England area from when you were younger. 1967 was the only year the Celtics didn't win the NBA title. So how spectacular of a decade was that for Boston and their dominance and your fandom of the NBA?
It was huge. And you're right. Interest in the Celtics was from our roots in New England. I can remember back in those days, my brothers and I listening to the games on the radio, just laying on the floor, listening to Johnny Most. It was a great time to be a Celtics fan because, winning championship after championship. And the fun thing for me was that when I got into the league, I got to become friends with a lot of the people I grew up idolizing, got to spend time with them and get to know them individually.
Just some fantastic memories there for you, I'm sure. And just as a quick aside, have you been watching HBO's Celtics City series?
Absolutely. I watch it every week. You'll love it. It's great. The 1960s was a turbulent time in the United States. The civil rights movement was in full force. The war in Vietnam was going on. So you had anti-war protests. You had student protests on campuses, both for civil rights and anti-war. And the documentary on the Celtics does a great job of dealing with the racial issues that were going on in Boston, the busing issues. And as much as the team was thought of as being a great team and supported by the fans, there was still that racial tension that existed in Boston, unfortunately. They deal with that in the documentary, and they tell the stories about some of the terrible things that happened. And Satch Sanders, who was a member of that team, has become a friend over the years, and we get together still today for lunch, I'd say twice a year. He said to me one day, he said, all those years that we won the championship, we would never sell out during the regular season. I said, really? I wasn't aware of that. He said, we got good crowds, but we wouldn't sell out. And we'd win championship after championship. Now in the finals, we'd sell out. And he said, but when Larry Bird came to town, they started selling out every game. Sadly, that's part of the racial dynamic, that all of a sudden you got the white hope, the white star who comes in. And when you look back at the late 50s and throughout the 60s, the Celtics were just a phenomenal team with great players and great people. Red Auerbach had the guts basically to, first of all, draft a black player. First person ever to draft a black player in 1950 with Chuck Cooper. Then in 1963, he started 5 black players, which was unheard of in the NBA. Nobody did that. He didn't care. He just said, I'm starting the 5 best players. And simple as that. I love the documentary. It goes into all this.
I'm definitely looking forward to it. In recent years, actually, your name has been featured as an eligible candidate on the Basketball Hall of Fame ballot. You were nominated as a contributor. Congratulations on that.
Thanks very much.
You have a keen interest in humanitarian work, social justice, Black history, as we've just alluded to. Where did that passion first develop for you, Pete?
I think it started when I was in high school in the 1960s because I was like everybody else. You'd watch the news every night. The civil rights movement got my attention because every night you would see the nonviolent approach that the civil rights workers were using and the abuse that they were taking and not striking back. It gained momentum because of the anti-violence approach that they had so that people around the country who weren't directly living in that area, particularly the southern part of the United States, began to empathize with it and go like, wait a minute, this is not right. These people are being treated terribly. And then my dad became a board member on the Phoenix Urban League in around 1970. He was able to get me on the board as the youngest board member. I was a college student at the time, and I served on the board for 10 years, and Jesse Owens was on the board. So I got to work with Jesse Owens for 10 years and listen to his stories and his experiences in life. It really got my attention. I just became very interested in it and started studying it. And started taking some classes at Arizona State on minority group politics and just trying to learn more about the whole thing. And then as my career evolved, my interest kept building and building. Then in the NBA, you're working in a business that's predominantly African-American. I thought it was important to understand the culture, understand other people as much as I possibly could, and expose our players to other things outside of the game of basketball. I got lucky enough to work with John Lewis for the 13 years I was in Atlanta, and we became good friends, and he inspired me to do a lot. And a coach named Ben Joe, who died a few years ago, really mentored me a lot. Wayne Embry taught me an awful lot. Casey Jones became a good friend, and Zach Sanders, and just learned a lot from all these people. Paul Silas I worked with and learned from his experiences. It just became a passion of mine. I found a way to use basketball as a vehicle to help make a difference in the different communities that we were in, at least to make an attempt to.
That's fantastic. And obviously, no wonder you became entrenched in that over the many decades since. The Phoenix Suns, their inaugural NBA season commenced in late 1968. You're in Phoenix. You attended numerous games. How soon did you know that you wanted to work in the NBA?
When the Suns came to town as an expansion team, there'd probably be 3,500, 4,000 people at a game initially, and you could buy general admission ticket for like $3, $3.50. And so I go down with my teammates, buy a general admission ticket, and you could sit almost anywhere in the building because there was such a small crowd. I would sit there and I'd think to myself, if I could do anything in the world, this is what I would do, having no idea how to get there. I didn't know anybody in the NBA. I wasn't even close to being talented enough to play in the NBA. So that's when it started to click that I needed to creatively figure out a way to try to get involved.
You played hoops for 2 years, I believe, at Glendale Community College. You graduated from Arizona State University in 1971. I believe you got a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's degree in education and sociology. You then returned to Maryvale High School in 1972 to volunteer as an assistant coach before landing a position to work full-time at Phoenix's Washington High, where you were the freshman basketball coach and a U.S. history teacher. So some great achievements there already. You then went on to become the head coach at Greenway High School.
To back up, I started at Maryvale. When I graduated from Arizona State in 71, my plan was to go to law school, use law school as a vehicle to help me in a political career and to run for Congress, do something like that. And my idealistic view of the world was help make the world a better place, right? So that my social conscience kind of kicked in. That's what I wanted to do. So I started law school at the University of Arizona, and I lasted the whole of 1 week, literally 1 week. Most people know it's a 3-year program. I was 1 week. At the end of the week, I was sitting in class thinking, I don't have the passion for this, and I've got to do something I have a passion for. So I quit law school, moved back to Phoenix, no job, no money. I went to my old high school of Maryvale, and I asked the head coach if I can volunteer to be his assistant for the year to see if I really wanted to do this. And he was good enough to let me do it. Wayne Kendall was the head coach at that time, and he let me be as a volunteer assistant. I loved it, absolutely loved it. So I knew I was on the right career path. And then I went to Washington High School the next year as a full-time coach and teacher, coaching freshman basketball for 5 years, and then the Greenway as the head coach. And a chance to be a head coach was great. I loved that. But I loved every step along the way. Coaching freshman basketball, I had great experiences, and I worked for a head coach there at Washington. It allowed me to run the summer camps and allowed me to do extra things to be involved. So it was a great experience, all of it.
Just as a quick aside, what was it like to be a U.S. history teacher at that time in your life?
It was fun because you were allowed to be really creative in your teaching at that time. I don't know that you can do it so much anymore in our education system in the United States. It's so much test-oriented and all that. So many teachers I talk to today have to teach for a test to prepare their students to pass a test. We didn't have to do that. I always looked at history as being more interesting than fiction because it really happened. But the problem was most students were bored with history because they would learn dates and facts and names, and it's not very interesting. For example, Abraham Lincoln's assassination. If you looked at a history book, there'd be one sentence that said, on April 14th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was shot and killed by John Wilkes Booth. Okay, that's the extent of the story. There's no detail to it. So what I would do is I would take a whole week and teach the Lincoln assassination in great detail about how John Wilkes Booth got these other co-conspirators and how they worked together and how they tried to kill the Secretary of State, how they tried to plan to kill the vice president. A total conspiracy to try to wipe out the Union government, and it failed, but they did kill Lincoln. But I get into all the details about the personalities involved, and so it kind of brings it more to life. And by teaching the most impactful event of a decade, then you had to teach about the Civil War. You had to teach about the politics of the time. Why did people want to assassinate him? Why are there people who loved him and also those that hated him? So you get into all the stuff you should get into, but you do it by bringing it alive with that one event. So I loved teaching history during that period of time, and I actually introduced Black history in the early 1970s at Washington High School as a part of my U.S. history course. That was one of my passions. It was a predominantly white high school where we probably had a few minority students, but not a whole lot. But I didn't get any pushback from anybody, and it was a great time to be teaching.
You're broadening people's horizons, and also you sound like the kind of teacher that I would love to have had. You can tell that you're passionate even right now, so that's good to hear. I was fascinated to read that in the early 1970s, you were recording NBA games on videotape to help you research teams, and you were building files on various franchises. You then mailed these scouting reports to some select NBA teams with a cover letter introducing yourself, which I think is genius in hindsight. How did that all transpire to give you those first opportunities to get your foot in the NBA doorway?
What happened was I didn't know anybody in the NBA. I knew that's what my dream was, is somehow figure out a way to work in the NBA. So I thought I need to learn about the league, not just as a fan. So I saved my money, bought a brand new videotape machine, great big, huge monster machines they had when they first came out, great big videotapes. Not every game was on TV like there is today. So the Phoenix Suns games were all on. So I recorded all their games, and that'd be like the game of the week on the weekend, one Saturday game, maybe a Sunday game. And then I would break down the tape. I would write reports on each team I had a tape on, which was not every team in the league, record their offensive sets, their out-of-bounds plays, special situations. I write reports on strengths and weaknesses of players. I'm really trying to teach myself about what different coaches would do, and last 10 seconds, what did they do with the ball out of bounds? And at the end of the year, I had these files built. I'm thinking to myself, okay, what do I do with these files? I've taught myself something about the league, but now I got this file cabinet. What do I do with this stuff? So I thought the teams I wrote about would know whether my reports were any good because it's about them. So I wrote a letter, cover letter. Of course, we had no email, no computers in those days. So I wrote a letter to each GM and head coach of the teams of which I had reports. And I just said, you don't know me. I'm a high school coach. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. Here's a report I wrote in your team this past year. When teams come through to play the Phoenix Suns, I'll go down. I'll write a report on the team for you. I'll mail it to you. Won't cost you a penny. I'll even pay for the mailings myself. Most teams didn't write back. A few teams wrote me nice notes back saying thanks, but no thanks. The New Orleans Jazz responded, and Bill Burka was the GM at that time, and Elgin Baylor was the head coach. And basically the response was, we don't have much money to spend on scouting. If you want to scout for free, go ahead. So I did. And I spent 2 years scouting for free for the New Orleans Jazz, but I learned. So during those 2 years, Bill Burka was great in reviewing my reports, critiquing them for me, telling me, okay, this part you've done a great job with. You got this down. This part, here's how you improve it. You do it this way. And he helped me learn. I made my mistakes. I got better at it. For 2 years, I'm scouting for free, but I'm enjoying it and having a great time. And I'm down in the arena regularly, and I'm meeting full-time NBA people who are traveling around. And one of them happened to be Jack McCloskey, who was an assistant coach with the Lakers at the time for Jerry West. And Jack would fly over frequently because it was a 45-minute flight from L.A., wherever the Suns were playing, and fly back home on the red-eye to be back for practice. And we just got to talk basketball. and got to know one another over those 2 years. Out of the blue, he calls me one day and he says, "Hey, you can save me making these flights. I got the okay to offer you a job as a part-time scout, and we'll pay you $50 a game." I wasn't real good in math, but I figured out it was better than zero. And so I took the job with the Lakers, and then it is built from there.
So much foresight to think about doing that. And speaking of Bill Burtka, it's closing in on 98, I think, later this year. Are you in touch still with Bill?
I haven't spoken with Bill in a few years. Last time I saw him was in Vegas, 2016. He was actually there scouting for the Lakers college tournaments, and ran into him. We spent time together. He's amazing. When he was in the NBA, when he was with New Orleans, he had his own scouting service, a collegiate scouting service called Burtka Views. And his wife ran the service out of Santa Barbara, California. And he hired me to work for them at the same time. So, in fact, first time I met him, his wife had sent me a probation scouting game, like a test. So she assigned a game for me at Arizona State University. And so I go to Arizona State, and I've got all these forms in front of me, and I'm sitting down at the desk, and I'm ready to start scouting. This gentleman sits down next to me, doesn't say who he is, doesn't say hello or anything, just sits there. I'm busy the whole first half, working and working and working. At halftime, he says, "I just want to say hello to you. I'm Bill Burtka." I said, "You're kidding me." And so he was sitting there watching me for a whole half, didn't tell me who he was. I had no idea who he was. I said, "I'm glad you didn't tell me who you were before we started." And he said, "No, you're doing a great job. Just keep it up." And I worked for a scouting service. He was producing a product to sell to other colleges. So they were like 45-page reports. They were really detailed, but it taught you how to be organized, how to put things together, in terms of describing different traits and offensive sets and defensive strategies. And he had it down. He had a great form put together. So he taught me a lot. And then the stuff with New Orleans also at the same time. And that's how the New Orleans stuff kicked in too, because he knew who I was because of the Burtka Views. And that helped me, I think, get the job being a volunteer with New Orleans.
That is a fantastic story. Oh. I can't believe it's just sitting beside you for the best part of a half, just to watch your mannerisms, see what you were doing, how conscientious you were, I guess, and made dividends.
I guess I'm just glad he didn't say anything to me before the game started.
Now, you mentioned that Bill became a mentor. Then you also developed a shorthand of sorts when it would come to scouting and doing player profiles and things like that. How did that develop?
Bill taught it to me, actually. So Bill had a system with shot charts, a shorthand for each shot. So a J1 was a stationary jumper, a J2 was a jumper off the dribble, a J3 was a turnaround jumper, L was a layup, D was a drive, S was a slam dunk. He had all these different codes he used so he could real quickly just put down on the shot chart what kind of shot it was, not just where it was on the floor. So I learned that from him, and then I improvised and added some things to it and revised it some for myself. So a lot of it came from his mentoring. And then I developed kind of a shorthand method for recording things like rebounds. And I have an area in my form with offensive rebounds, defensive rebounds, but I put an O or a D, and I put a small T right next to it if it was what I call a tough rebound. Player created the rebound rather than a position rebound where it just fell to him because he happened to be in the right place at the right time. And then so when I went back to transpose this into longhand, I could just look at all those little notes I had because I wanted to keep my eyes on the floor as much as I could rather than writing during the game. So I'd go back afterwards and then write it out, whatever was necessary at the time.
Now, you were the camp director at the Alvan Adams, Paul Westphal basketball camp in mid to late 1970s. Two legendary names, of course, in Arizona and NBA law. How did you connect with Alvan and Paul, and what memories do you have from those camps, Pete?
Well, nothing but great memories. And the way it happened was I was still a freshman coach at Washington High School. And I got a phone call. This is Paul Westphal. And I'm thinking like, Paul Westphal? Why is Paul Westphal calling me? Well, I wasn't sure it was a prank call at first or not, and he assured me that it wasn't. And he said he'd gotten my name from some people that he respected who were high school coaches in the Phoenix area who had run camps for years. And so went and met with him and then met with Alvan, ended up, working for them through my first couple of years with the Clippers. And then eventually it got to be too much. I couldn't keep doing it, but they were great. The camp was so successful because so many pros have camps and they show up one day a week. They have high school coaches run the camp all week. They show up, make an appearance. Paul and Alvan, kids stayed there the whole week. Paul and Alvan stayed at the camp 24 hours a day. They ate their meals with the kids. If there was time in the swimming pool, they were in the pool with the kids. As a result, we had great return enrollment. Kids would go home and say, I had lunch with Paul Westphal, and, I had breakfast with Alvan Adams, and blah, 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 and I want to go back next year. So the camp was really successful because of Paul and Alvan and their presence and their commitment to it. But it was great for me because I would hire the staff every year. I would use it to try to also evaluate players because we also hired counselors, and the counselors were college players. And one of the players that I hired one year was a guy named Fat Lever, who was playing at Arizona State. And I got to know Fat really well, which paid dividends years later. When I went to the Nuggets from San Diego, there was a trade in the process of being made. The Nuggets had a choice of Darnell Valentine or Fat Lever. Well, I knew Fat really well, and I knew what his upside was. And so I said, Fat Lever, definitely Fat Lever. But anyway, so the experience on the camp couldn't have been better.
Oh, that's great. I love these stories. Thank you very much for sharing them. To have Alvan and Paul staying with the kids for that entire time as like a sleepaway camp, I mean, that just sounds like the stuff that dreams are made of for kids at that age to foster their love of the game from guys that are at such a high level as well.
Exactly, because Alvan was Rookie of the Year. Paul was a perennial all-star. They're such great people, and they're great with the kids, and it wasn't like work for them, and they enjoyed it, and which came through. You could see that their interest in the kids was sincere. The camp was really successful.
I love a good Fat Lever mention, and we'll get to Fat in a little while. Fortunate enough to meet him in 2020 in Chicago. My wife and I were holidaying in the US, and Fat made time to meet in person. He was a guest on my podcast, so I'm quite biased towards Fat Lever. He's a great guy.
Yes.
Now, I'm not sure exactly of the timeline here, but it might have been towards the end of that run with the Alvan Adams, Paul Westphal camp. You made a fortuitous trip back to Maine that coincided with an NBA summer camp that was held by longtime assistant John Killalay. I think, is that how you pronounce his name?
Right, Killalay. Huh?
Yeah. It's important to note that you were still working as a high school teacher at this time. How was that meeting and the opportunities that would then also present going forwards for you?
Well, it's just one of those things that, be in the right place at the right time. So I'm back in Bangor, Maine, visiting a cousin, and I pick up the paper, and John Killalay, who was an assistant coach with the Bucks at that time with Don Nelson, was running a basketball camp just down the street at a small college. I thought, well, this is crazy, because I'd read about Killalay, and he had, at that time, was one of the only people who'd moved from high school coaching straight to the NBA, never coached in college. That's what I was trying to do. So I thought I need to meet him and just pick his brain and get career advice from him. So I went down to the camp the next day, introduced myself, and he said, listen, come back tonight and we'll talk basketball. So I did, spent a couple hours with him. I didn't ask him for a job or anything. We just talked basketball. I just asked him about how we made the transition and how it worked out. He knew that's what I was trying to do. And that was kind of the end of that conversation, but he was great. It gave me a lot of time. I didn't think anything of it. After that, I go back to Phoenix, and I get a call from him sometime early in the fall. And he said, listen, we need somebody who would be willing to scout the West Coast for us. It won't be a full-time job. You'll still coach at the high school, but Friday nights, Saturday nights, and Sunday nights, we'll fly around the West Coast to see pro games for personnel, and then also see college games for the draft. And I spent 2 years doing that with them. I'd finish school like at 3:00 in the afternoon, go right to the airport. A typical weekend is I'd fly to LA, scout the Lakers game that night. Next day, fly to San Francisco, maybe do a college game in the afternoon up there, see the Warriors play that night or their opponent. Next day, fly to Portland or Seattle, see a game there, take the red eye home, get home like at 1 a.m, and then be teaching Monday morning again. So I did that for 2 years and loved it, absolutely loved it. It was just like another step in this process. I enjoyed the volunteer work, even though I was making no money, working now part-time. And then as a regional scout, I was having a great time. If it would have stopped at that point, and that's what I did for the rest of my career, probably would have been very happy because I was having a great time. I loved it. And I loved coaching high school basketball too. So, but it just kept building, step by step.
Remarkable. In 1979, the Bucks, Don Nelson, offered you an assistant coaching role, but you chose to knock it back due to the existing commitments that you had at Greenway High School. How difficult was that, possibly entering the NBA in the assistant coaching role versus what you were currently committed to high school-wise?
Well, it was really a complicated deal. So Nelly called me right before the draft. He was asking me all kinds of questions about players I'd seen, and it was like a job interview in a way over the phone because I didn't deal with Nelly a lot. I dealt with John Kilday all the time. I got to meet Nelly. His team would come practice at Greenway High School when they would come to Phoenix. At the end of this long phone conversation, he offers me a job as a bench assistant, which was my dream. At that time, they were winning division championships every year. They were one of the best teams in the NBA. This is right before the draft, so it's late June. He said, it's like a rubber stamp, but I have to get my owner's approval. He's in Europe right now. I can't officially offer you the job until he comes back, but basically make your plans to move and all that. I tell my principal about it at the high school. I said about it, I don't want to publicize it or anything. Let's wait and see what happens. Well, some of my players had heard about it. I just tried to low key it. And Nelly calls me. He says, I got thrown a curve. Our owner came back. We have no blacks in our front office or on our basketball staff. And he wants me to hire a black assistant coach. And he said, I had no idea this is what he wanted me to do. So my hands are tied. So I said, well, I'm disappointed, but I understand why. And I think he's right. In this business, you should. So I appreciate it. And I go back to my principal and I tell him I'm staying. That's kind of the end of it, right? Well, then Nelly calls me. It's right before Labor Day. And he said, the guy we hired, we went through rookie camp with him. It was a disaster. And the owner said, look, do whatever you have to do. Forget all that. So I'm offering you the job again. Well, for me, we'd already started the school year. We started before Labor Day. So I said, well, now I'm kind of in a bind here. And he said, well, I need you to fly out here and let's meet, see if we can agree on a contract. I go out and see my principal. He said, this is your dream. You got to go do it. Take a few days off and just go to Milwaukee. So I did and met with him. Didn't sign anything, but we agreed on a contract. He said, go back and talk to your wife about it and then get back here the day after Labor Day and let's go to work and we'll sign the contract then. So I said, okay. So I fly back. I meet with my principal and he says, you got to go. You have to take the job because this is what you've been working towards. We'll be fine and we'll get somebody to replace you. So I meet with my team and I told them that I was leaving and I had a terrible time with it. It really bothered me. So I called Nelly that night when I got home right before the weekend. And he said, listen, I appreciate how you feel. Do me a favor. Promise me this. You won't see any of your players over the weekend and you'll feel better on Monday. Call me Monday and come to work on Tuesday, okay? Okay, all right, I finally do it. Well, I didn't feel better about it. And so I called him after Labor Day and I said, I can't do it. I just can't do it. I told these kids I was staying for the year. I said, it may be stupid, but I just can't do it. So I gave up the opportunity, not knowing that I'd ever get another chance to get in the NBA full time. But looking back on it, it worked out fine. But anyway, that's the backstory on how that all happened.
That's incredible. And to have the moral compass, be able to put the school first ahead of a possible entry to the NBA, that's huge, clearly. You mentioned Paul Silas briefly a little while ago. In 1980, after retirement, he was named the coach of the San Diego Clippers. Don Nelson, who we've just been talking about, and of course Paul Westphal, another guy we've already talked about, they both recommended you for an interview with Silas to become one of his assistants with the Clippers. What do you recall of those conversations and how that went when you first met with Paul?
With Paul Westphal, I knew him real well, and I knew Nelly, somewhat, but not real well. Paul Westphal was probably most instrumental. What had also happened is Paul Westphal's older brother, Bill, had already been hired by Silas as his number one assistant. And so he's going to hire a second assistant. And they basically said, we can't get you the job, but we think we can get you an interview. I didn't know Paul Silas. So I get the interview, spent time with Paul Silas, fly from San Diego back to Phoenix. I don't know, it was a week or so later, Paul Silas calls me and offers me the job and I went to work for him. And I remember asking him years later, because we stayed friends throughout the rest of his life. I remember asking him, why did you hire me, a high school coach? Because you interviewed Willis Reed, you interviewed John Block, you interviewed a number of former NBA guys. And he said, well, real simple. He said, I was a former NBA guy. I played for 16 years in the NBA. I didn't need another former player with me. I needed somebody who had organizational skills, and was detail-oriented because he said, I'm not. That's the reason why we made the decision.
Now, ahead of San Diego's third NBA season, you landed the assistant coach / director of scouting role with the Clippers. And I read that from exhibition season through Christmas of 1980, you were sent out to scout Clippers opponents twice, I believe, and then you'd rejoin the team occasionally before concentrating on the 1981 NBA draft, where you selected the great Tom Chambers. What are your memories of scouting TC? He's been a guest recently on the podcast, a fantastic guy to chat to, and the impact that he made whilst he was in San Diego.
I saw him play a number of times. It was a really unique situation because here I am, an assistant coach and director of scouting. It was a unique situation in that I was the only person in the organization that actually went out and saw players. And then so they let me handle the draft. So here I'm an assistant coach making the draft picks, basically. Tom impressed me with his athleticism. I thought he had huge upside. Now, he played with Danny Vrains, was his teammate, and they both went off the Olympic team. Danny made the team. Tom got cut. And I talked to the Olympic people. They basically cut Tom because they thought he was kind of ornery, temperamental, and Danny was like the all-American guy, right? I wasn't concerned about that because to me, he was the guy that was the missing piece. I mean, he's up front for us because we had Bill Walton at center if he was healthy, which so sadly rarely was, but we had Walton at center. The night before the draft, we had a general manager who was a marketing guy, basically, a very good guy, and he knew Chambers was the guy I wanted to take, and we were drafting 9th or somewhere in that range. I can't remember the exact number. He said he had a dream or something that we took Danny Vrains, and he was locked into it. In the morning of the draft, he was insistent that we take Danny Vrains, and I argued I said, there's no comparison between the two players. I don't think against Danny Vrains, but Tom Chambers is like light years ahead of him in terms of his ability to play the game. We kept talking to Paul Silas. Paul, you gotta convince him that the GM was like locked in. And again, he's a great guy, but he just wasn't a basketball guy. Luckily, Philadelphia took Danny Vrains before we selected. So Vrains was off the table, so we were able to take Tom. So I breathed a sigh of relief when Danny got drafted. And when I was still with the Clippers, we traded Tom to Seattle, which I was not really happy about. The craziness was Donald Sterling and all the stuff that went on. But so Tom is up in Seattle. He becomes a free agent. And when I was in Denver, I wanted to go after him as a free agent. He had signed with Phoenix before I could even get to his agent. So we didn't have a chance to compete for him. But Tom was a big-time player.
During the 1982 season, the Clippers were facing financial insecurity. The franchise had to let marketing staff go, and they even restricted the scouting budget to a point where your on-the-road scouting was curtailed significantly. I think you were mostly in Phoenix at Veterans Memorial Coliseum, and you'd make the trip to San Diego. You relied on watching games on videotape more often than not. How would you rate the facilities on offer to pro teams in the NBA of the early 1980s, perhaps San Diego versus other teams that you since learned about?
We were so far behind. Donald Sterling had purchased the team, and after January 1st, deferred money became due for players that you no longer had on your roster. And for example, Sterling had to pay Paul Silas deferred money. It was kind of complicated, but recent history before this, Irv Levin had owned the Boston Celtics. John Y. Brown owned the Buffalo Braves. Irv Levin wanted a team on the West Coast. They certainly weren't going to let him move the Boston Celtics to the West Coast. So he and John Y. Brown traded franchises. And then Irv moved the Buffalo Braves to San Diego. Well, in that exchange, Paul Silas had been a player for the Boston Celtics. So his contract was part of their exchange that they did. Paul's contract went on to San Diego with Irv, and Irv had to pay his deferred money that he had earned playing for the Celtics. Now Sterling inherits that when he buys the team. I remember Sterling saying, I don't understand why I have to pay my head coach money for playing for me. He's not playing for me. I mean, he kind of played dumb. Like, it's like, I don't understand this. Like, you assume the debts of the team. Anyway, so scouting budget was cut, and I was the only one out scouting. So I'm told, stay home in Phoenix, because we maintained our home there. My wife was teaching there. There'd be a perception that we weren't working on all cylinders. So I was flown over for every home game to be on the bench, like everything was normal. Well, I even went to them and said, listen, fans don't care whether I'm on the bench or not as an assistant coach. They probably don't even notice whether I'm on the bench or not, right? It's not going to make an impact. Why don't we take the money that's costing to fly me back and forth in a hotel and let me use that to go out and scout, kind of prepare for the draft? Wouldn't let me do it. So I'm on the bench for every home game, and I'm scouting games, like you said, the teams come play Phoenix. I'm scouting college games at Arizona State or University of Arizona, and then watching games that I tape. And that's how I was preparing for the draft. I don't know of any other team that was having to go through that. I remember getting a call from our accounting office, and they said, don't cash your check this week because it's no good. And we'll tell you when you can cash it. And I said, well, all of us, we have house payments to make. We have bills to pay. I mean, we got to kind of cash our check at some point, right? I mean, that's how crazy it got for a short time. Luckily, that was freed up not too long after that. But it's kind of a shock when you get that call not to cash your check.
I can only imagine. That's wild. Following the 82 season, you drafted Terry Cummings, who would win the 1983 Rookie of the Year, fantastic NBA veteran. What was his impact as well in San Diego?
Like each rookie that we drafted, none of them came to camp on time because it was impossible negotiating with our organization. Alan Rothenberg was the president of the team. Sterling was the owner. They would handle the negotiations themselves. Normally, two sides start, way apart from one another and you come closer together. It didn't work that way with Sterling. He kept lowering the offer all the time, getting further apart rather than closer together. Terry didn't come to camp on time. With Terry, it was really unique. Terry finally told his agent, listen, if the owner doesn't think I'm good enough, tell him I'll sign a non-guaranteed contract. Now, he said, I want guarantees for health, but if he thinks I'm not good enough, he wants to cut me and not pay me a penny, fine. I'll sign that contract today. Because Terry knew he was good enough that if he got cut, he was going to get picked up by somebody else right away. And it certainly wasn't going to cut him. That's when Terry decided to come in. By that point, I don't know what date it was he came in, but he met us on the road. I think we were playing in Milwaukee, came up and met us the second or third week of preseason. It was late. That was how it came to fruition. He's the only player I've ever been involved with who said, I'll waive the non-guarantee, especially a guy who was picked as the second pick in the draft. Now we had Terry at one forward, Tom at the other side, and Walton in the middle when Walton was healthy. So we had makings of a pretty good front line if it all stayed together.
Bill Walton, obviously a legend of the game. How was your relationship with Bill over the years? Obviously not long ago had passed away.
Well, two different sides of him. We stayed friends, and I talked to him like a couple of months before he passed away, and I had no idea he was sick. I mean, he didn't let on. He was his old self, upbeat, positive, enthusiastic about life and everything, and just no clue that he was sick. But when he was playing for us, he was not easy to deal with. And I said this to him years later, I said, I never knew you were in that much pain, the physical pain he was in. But here's an example. I go back to when we first went to San Diego. John Wooden had a basketball camp in San Diego, summer camp. Paul Silas, Bill Westphal, and I would go walk with Coach Wooden every day for an hour. Every noon, he walked for 1 hour, and he invited us to join him. So every day we walked with him and just picked his brain. And one of the things that he said to us is that Walton was going to test us. That's just what he does. He said he loves him. He's an unbelievable player, unbelievable talent. But he said that's his makeup. He's going to test you. So sure enough, the first day we go to training camp in Yuma, Arizona, of all places, at a junior college. And Paul Silas had rules that everybody had their shirts tucked in at practice. We had blue and orange reversible jerseys. Everybody wore blue. We had 2-a-day practices. In the morning, Walton comes out, and he's got his shirt tail out. So Paul Silas says, Bill, tuck your shirt in. He tucks it in. Second practice that night, Bill comes out, his shirt's tucked in, but he's orange. Everybody else is blue. Silas very calmly, Bill, flip your shirt over to blue. Bill flips it over to blue, tucks it in. The next morning, our third practice, we're running short bank shot drill, layup lines, but everybody's taking short bank shots, and Walton goes in and dunks it. So Silas stops the drill and says, Walton, you come with me out in the hall. And he says, Pete, you and Bill, keep the drill going. Nobody's paying attention to us, including us. We're listening to what's going on out in the hall. Now, Silas, you got to remember, just retired. He was a pretty tough player physically. And he goes out the hallway. He threatens to kill Bill in no uncertain terms in front of all of his teammates if he ever crosses him again. And Bill never crossed him again. I mean, Paul just laid into him big time. And Bill was, I think, afraid of him, So it's like, okay. But then Bill got hurt, in practice. And then he couldn't practice anymore in training camp. And he would get up to play against Kareem or against Ralph Sampson or any of the name players. He got up to play against them and played great. I mean, just unbelievable. But he was in so much pain that he couldn't sustain it. And he had to sit out for a week or then 2 weeks or then 3 weeks and then come back and play. And he was challenging from a coaching perspective, but he really knew the game. He would talk to me about the intricacies of the game, and his basketball IQ was off the charts. And then after, he had retired and went into broadcasting, we run into each other on the road and got along great. And as I said, I talked to him on the phone a few months before he passed away, and I had no idea he was even sick. Remarkable person.
Great story there with him and poor Silas getting quite willing outside the practice court.
Yeah.
Here's something that intrigued me. You drafted Manute Bol in 1983. A friend of newly hired coach Jim Lynham had mentioned that there was a 7'6" guy from Sudan who was thin as a rail but could play hoops. And you had a great quote re that draft, and it was the following: "You wouldn't believe the publicity we got on Manute Bol, and we didn't even know if he existed at that point." End quote. And then you have one more gem, which read, "They put him on a 5,000 calorie diet and he lost 10 pounds.
Yeah. Okay.
What are your recollections of Manute at that stage? And fantastic shot blocker in years to come, but at that stage was a complete project.
We honestly did not know who he was. In those days, we had 10 rounds in the draft, and the draft went on all day. And we got a call, I can't remember who it was that called him, who told him about Manute and said, you got to draft this guy, And so Jimmy was all excited because then you got to take him. And I said, well, we will. I said, trust me, nobody knows this guy. Unless your friend is telling everybody in the NBA, nobody knows this guy. We will draft him. So when I got to maybe the 5th round or so, we selected him. The league ended up disapproving the pick. They threw it out because we couldn't prove his age. And we didn't even know if he was real or not. I mean, listen to me, you got to call your friend and get the spelling of his name. I mean, I'd never heard this before. So we draft him. They disallow the pick because we cannot prove his age. And then he ends up coming to the United States and plays in college, Bridgeport. Bridgeport comes into the NBA, and a unique player. And he was a 3-point shooter and a shot blocker, and he was a real player. But when we drafted him, had no idea that, if it was a figment of somebody's imagination, that somebody made this up. But we got to the 5th round. I told Jimmy, okay, we'll do it now in the 5th round.
Great story. That's a great one. Another hat that you wore, I think this time in 1983 perhaps, was that of a color analyst on the radio broadcasts. What are your memories of your time there as a radio broadcaster?
Well, what happened was I had no interest in a career doing that, but I had made the transition from being on the bench to being director of player personnel. Paul Phipps had become our new general manager, and he asked me to move off the bench and be director of player personnel because Paul was a marketing business specialist from the Dallas Mavericks and great guy and knew the business side extremely well. I talked to Paul Silas about it and the wisdom of moving off the bench, and he encouraged me because things weren't going well. Paul Silas was on the hot seat. It was getting to that point where who knew it's going to all blow up. So Paul Silas gave me good career advice and said, look, you should move off the bench. It should be safer for you and better for your career. So I did. Paul Phipps wanted me to stay with the team regularly, to just be around the team. So he wanted me to do the color with Ralph Lawler, who's Hall of Fame broadcaster with the Clippers. And so I did it for a year. No intention of having a career doing it. The very first game, I've never done this before in my life. So I'm preparing for the game, studying, the other team and just stories about players and backgrounds and all this stuff. And we go through the first half and I'm playing off of Ralph, feel pretty comfortable. It comes to halftime. We're on the air. He takes his headset off and walks away and leaves me by myself on the air live. Now, I've been playing off of Ralph the whole half, but now I'm there by myself. I don't know what to do, you know. It's like, okay, we go to commercial break now, or what? I don't remember what I said. Like, I just remember thinking, like, what are you doing? He's standing over looking at me laughing, you know. This is like my initiation into all this, you know. So that's the first memory I have of all this. But it was fun doing it for the year, but I had no interest in doing it in the future.
Now, in late March of 1984, you were named the VP of Basketball Operations. How did you balance your working relationship, and you've alluded to it a little bit there, with Clippers owner Donald Sterling, obviously infamous, going back many decades, I guess. As you rose within the ranks of the franchise, how did you balance that relationship with Sterling?
It was interesting, and we got along fine. He treated me well. The only real conflict we had is when he moved the team to L.A. You know, he did it basically at night. He basically packed up and moved to L.A., didn't tell the league about it till he was in L.A. We're running the draft out of my house in San Diego. We had a big meeting, and Jimmy Lyon was in the meeting. Jimmy and I were the only two basketball people in the meeting. That was Arn Tellem was our general counsel, Rothenberg, president of the team, and then Sterling. And Don said to me, I want you to tell people you're working out of L.A. And I got upset with him. And I said, I'm not going to lie to anybody. I work out of my house in San Diego. And he goes, just tell people you're working out of L.A. I said, no, that's a lie. I mean, I'm not. I remember Jimmy stepping in because he knew I was getting upset. The day of the draft, we actually held the draft up in one of his hotels he owned. He had us all come up there for like 2 days and ran the draft out of there. In that meeting, Jimmy left, and I said to the group, Arn Tellem, Rothenberg, and Sterling, I'm getting paid as director of player personnel, and I'd like to talk to you about a new contract, because if I'm going to be the general manager of the team, I'm not asking for the highest salary in the NBA. Obviously, I'm a rookie, but I'd like to have a raise because you're paying me as director of player personnel. Mm-hmm. And Rothenberg said to me, why would we do that? You have a year left on your contract. I said, well, my year left as the director of player personnel, not as a GM. You're changing my role. And he said, well, you have no marketability. You work for us. You work for the Clippers. Who's going to hire you? So there's no competition. So why would we do it? And so I responded right away, Alan, you may be right. Maybe you're 100% right. Could I have your permission to talk to other teams to find out if you're right? And he said, talk to anybody you want. That's fine. You're free to talk to people. So I talked to the Denver Nuggets. I talked to Seattle. I talked to Indiana. And Denver was willing to offer me a job. And so I resigned from the Clippers. I called them, sent them a letter, resignation, you know, that I stayed for 2 more weeks or whatever it was. I can't remember. And Sterling said, come up and see me at my office in Wilshire Boulevard and talk to me before you officially leave. I said, okay. So I drove to L.A. We're standing in his office looking out over Bel Air, you know, one of the most exclusive areas in Los Angeles. And he says to me, why wouldn't you want to live out there? And I said, well, number one, you don't pay me enough to live out there. Yeah. And he changed the subject. And that was the last conversation we had about the job anyway. Years later, you know, I'd run into him some places at games and things, and he'd say hi and, you know, it would be cordial. But I never heard the racial comments that he made later on that got him forced out of the league. I heard a lot of craziness, a lot of absurd things that made no sense. I never heard the racial things. Those incidents happened years later.
Mid-July of 1984, you were then named Director of Player Personnel for the up-and-coming Denver Nuggets, a franchise that was on the rise, getting set to become Western Conference contenders for the rest of the 1980s. How was the arrival in Denver for you, and how were you greeted in contrast to the last few weeks, I suppose, of your tenure with the Clippers?
Time in Denver was probably my favorite stay in the NBA. Great experience, great people. I got hired by Vince Barilla, who was the new president of the team. And Vince had played for the Knicks, coached the Knicks, you know, way, way back, and then had been out of basketball for a while, worked in the ABA for a while, a very successful businessman in Denver. When he hired me, he was in the middle of making the big Kiki Vandeweghe trade. My contribution was the Fat Lever contribution, basically, because he asked, who should we get? We got a choice of Darnell, Valentine, or Fat Lever. And I told him the story behind Fat Lever and his upside, and definitely take Fat Lever. And so we got Fat. We got Wayne Cooper and Calvin Nat, and first round pick that became Blair Rasmussen. and a second-round draft pick, I think, called for Kiki. And the trade that Vince made turned the team around. It was phenomenal. We won the division, made it to the Western Conference Finals against the Lakers, and overachieved. I mean, we weren't nearly as talented as the Lakers, but we scared them a little bit. We got beaten game one badly. We came back and won by something like 20 in game two. We weren't going to beat them, but we put a little scare into them, and the town reacted great. They had a parade for us downtown. You thought we would have won the championship, and we lost. The fans in Denver were off the charts. They were phenomenal. If you showed great effort and you overachieved, they supported you 100%. You didn't have to win the championship, just had to go out and play hard. And we had a team that did. Doug Moe was coaching the team, and he did a great job. He's such a unique coach, and the system that he ran of wide open freelance kind of basketball and passing game and constant movement. It was just an ideal mix. Our favorite stay probably in the NBA.
Now, I read somewhere that you were responsible for starting the NBA pre-draft combine. What time frame would we be talking here, and is that accurate?
No, it's not accurate. I didn't start it. It was started by Pete Newell, Jerry Colangelo, and Stu Inman. Those three individuals started the camp. I coached in the first one as an assistant coach. A few years later, Jerry Colangelo called me, and he said, look, we got the camp up and running. We want to turn it over to younger guys to run it. And so I obviously was excited about that because there's an opportunity just to be more involved. Jerry was responsible for calling me and asking me if I wanted to take it over, and I did. And so I directed it for, 20, 25 years. I directed it until they changed the format where there was no more team competition, because that's how we used to set it up. It was another learning experience, great opportunity to help evaluate players, put together a coaching staff that we wanted every year to coach, because we had 6 teams. They would come in and compete against one another, and bench assistants would be the head coaches, and then they would bring in an assistant with them. So it was a chance to get to know all those coaches better and learn about them, but also be close up front and personal with all the players who were there.
As the 1986 season neared its end, you had a bevy of Nuggets players whose contracts were expiring. You were responsible for signing Alex English to a 4-year deal, and 3 days later, Fat Lever to a 5-year contract. This is right around when the team was solidified as a Western Conference challenger. And do you think that also helped foster the unity of the team and helped it build in those years that were to come?
We had continuity with that team. So the years I was in Denver, those 6 years, we didn't make a whole lot of changes. Kept that group together as best we could. And so that really helped the way Doug coached, because they understood his system. They understood how we were going to play. And that enabled us to have more success, I think.
Just a quick aside before we chatted today, one of the things that you sent through to me, which is fascinating to look at, was a player personnel recap of Scottie Pippen at the 1987 Aloha Classic. What was it like to see a young Scottie Pippen, almost unknown at that stage, coming out of Central Arkansas, given the impact he would have come his NBA arrival?
His talent jumped out. He ran well. He was athletic. He had the long body. His skill set was strong. He played at both ends of the floor. He did a little bit of everything. It wasn't hard to evaluate a guy like that, because once you saw him play, you go like, wow, this guy's a special player.
In February of 1990, you were hired away from the Nuggets by president and then GM of the Hawks, Stan Kasten. He had hired you to become Atlanta's GM. What do you recall of those conversations, and how was that move relocating from Denver to Atlanta?
That was kind of a painful period, because there's a whole long story behind leaving Denver. I didn't really want to leave Denver. Worked for Sidney Schlenker, who was one of the best owners I've ever been involved with. Generous person, great person. But he was being forced to sell the team, and he was selling to the first minority ownership, Bert Lee and Peter Bino, and was completely supported by David Stern at the time as, being something that was great for the NBA, because it'd be the first minority ownership. So I was told I was going to stay in the same position as president and GM. And then that quickly changed to, we're bringing in Dave Checketts to be the president of the team. You'll stay as GM. You'll work for him. I knew Dave from his days in Utah. We were friends. And so he comes in I tried to help him as best I can, get everything going. We got along fine. The deal hadn't closed yet, and they had all these investors lined up. They thought we're going to invest money, and Dave was flying around the country meeting with them, and he came back and he told me, this is all smoke and mirrors. These investors said they might invest. Nobody's committing. There's no money behind this deal. The deal was falling apart. So David Stern went to Bob Westphal, who was the CEO of ComSat, and he said, I need you to be the behind-the-scenes money guy, and you got to step in and buy the Denver Nuggets, and then I'll help you sell it in the future, and you'll make a profit. But I need your help. You got to step in and do this, because Lee and Bynum didn't have the resources to do this. However, they had signed a contract, I guess, with David's help to be managing partners of the team. They had an ironclad contract to be managing partners. They each put $125,000 into the deal, which was nothing, basically. No matter who owned the team, they got to make all the basketball decisions. Westphal comes in, resurrects the deal, gets it done. This gets pretty complicated, but in the meantime, Chuckis leaves, just disappears. They make me president and GM again. They bring in a new guy. He won't come unless he's the GM and the president. I'm just kind of in limbo, even though I have a contract to be president and GM. They don't know what to do with me. And I had 6 years left on my contract. So I had a really long contract. They didn't know what to do with that. They didn't want to pay me off. So Blair Rasmussen is going to be a free agent at the end of the year. And so the new president of the team, he called me and I says, you know Herb Radoy, right? And I said, yeah, who was the agent for Blair? And he says, call Herb and have him come in. We want to talk about signing Blair now to a new contract. So I said, okay. I call Herb. He comes in the next day from Chicago. I go down and try to get the president of the team. I said, when you come down and meet Herb? And he said, no, you handle it. You know him. I don't know. I've never met him before. But I'll give you the numbers. He's the only one in the office that has a computer in those days. He types out a proposal and it prints it out on his computer and he hands it to me. He says, here, give that to Herb. I take it down. I give it to Herb. It's a really low ball offer. And Herb thinks it's kind of funny. He goes like, isn't he going to come down and talk to me? And he goes, Herb, I don't know what to tell you. He just said for me to bring this to you. And he goes, okay. So he tears off this yellow sheet of paper and he writes down this ridiculous offer like Michael Jordan numbers. Here, take that to him. It's John Spoelstra. That was his name. Eric Spoelstra's dad. So I take it down to John. I said, John, here's Herb's counter. Herb thought it was a joke. I mean, Herb was kind of laughing when he did it. John takes it seriously. So he types up a counter proposal to Herb's proposal, has me deliver that. And I'm thinking, this is weird. This is really strange. Dan Issel was working for me as my assistant and had his office right next to me. I said, Dan, you got to stay with me the rest of the day because something's going on here that's weird. We go back and forth all day like this. And then Spoelstra gives me one and says, here, tell him this is our final offer. And I said, okay, take it down to Herb. Time it's just a joke. It's a total joke. And so Herb, he writes up his final counter and he says, give us to Spoelstra, tell him it's my final proposal. We're happy being free agents this summer. We'll just wait till the summer. And I take it down to Spoelstra with Dan Issel and Spoelstra accepts it. He goes, okay, tell him we got a deal. I said, well, don't you think you should come down and meet him after you're going to make a deal with him? And he goes, yeah, I'll come down a little bit. He comes down. He tells us, get the contracts ready. He shakes hands with Herb. We got a deal. It's all done. Have the contracts all typed up. We had a game that night. Have Blair come in, sign the contract, get it all done before the game. Okay, we will. So we do. We get it all done before the game. Spoelstra's nowhere to be found. And we're just sitting in the office, waiting. Blair's gone down to the locker room to dress out. I go down 5 minutes before game time and knock on his door. And he says, come in. I go in. He's sitting there with the two new owners, Bert Lee and Peter Bino. And he says, sit down. So I sit down. I'm listening to the conversation. He's telling them, we're making progress with Rasmussen. We're getting there, and I'm kind of like, what? Making progress? No. So I said, John, can I see you out in the hall for a minute? So I go out in the hallway. I said, John, you got to tell him the truth or you're going to dig a hole you can't get out of. And he goes, yeah, you're right. We go back and sit down. And he says, Pete just told me he signed him to a contract, so there's nothing left to do. And I said, no. Wait a minute. That's not what happened. They go nuts. The new owners go nuts. They threatened to fire me. It got to be a huge mess and goes on for months. They do an investigation. They find out that I told them the truth. They fire Spolster with cause. They give me my job back. And then turns out they really didn't want me to stay. And Westphal negotiates a settlement with me, and I leave and I go to Atlanta.
The wild exit, to say the least, from Denver there. But moving over to Atlanta, you spent 13 years with the Hawks. Some of the key moves that were made to build the Hawks into a contender in the East. You hired Lenny Wilkins as a coach in June of 93. A month later, you signed Craig Yellow as a free agent. In February 94, I'll ask you about it in a moment, you traded the franchise figure in Dominique Wilkins to the LA Clippers in return for Danny Manning. Danny's a former guest of the podcast. Later that year, you traded Kevin Willis, a long-time player with the Hawks as well. And in February 96, you traded for Christian Laettner. And in July of 96, you signed the one and only Dikembe Mutombo as a free agent. The Neek for Manning deal was obviously huge. How do you reflect on that trade 3 decades later?
I still get asked about it all the time. I'm down in Atlanta during the winter for a few months. And if I'm in the arena down there, inevitably somebody will stop me and say, why'd you ever trade Dominique Wilkins? Like, let it go. It's been a long time, but
it's just been a little while.
We loved Neek. We didn't want to trade him. Our hand kind of got forced. He was 34 years old. He was starting to slip physically. And his game was all his explosiveness. And he was phenomenal. I mean, he was like, obviously big time player and was the face of the franchise. His agent was asking for a 7-year contract. I think Larry Johnson had just signed a 7-year deal, and he wanted the same deal. I'm like, he'd be 41 years old if we do that. We can't do that. He's starting to lose a little bit now physically. And once he loses his lift, I mean, that's pretty much a big part of his game. But we promised to keep him as our highest paid player every year. Got to go shorter term, 1 or 2 years at a time and let this play out. But he should retire here. He should not ever change franchises. He's one of those unique players that never should leave. It was not contentious at all. We had no arguments. His agent just said, if you can't do it, you just need to trade him. I said, we don't want to trade Dominique Wilkins. Are you kidding me? I said, could I have your permission to talk to Neek? I didn't talk to players about their status with contracts and stuff. He said, yeah, talk to Neek all you want. So I meet with Neek. Same thing. I said, Neek, we don't want to be in a position to trade you. You can't go long term. And Neek was the same as his agent. Couldn't have been better. It's like, I understand the business. If you have to trade me, you have to trade me. That's fine. And I said, but we don't want to do that. And this went on for weeks. I probably had 3 or 4 different times where I sat and talked to him about it on a flight coming home from a road game and a couple times in the locker room, just the two of us. And it was always great. So then it's the All-Star break. All-Star game was in Minnesota. And my daughter, who was a college student, she flew in to spend the weekend with me in Minneapolis. She and I are having lunch in the hotel, and Donald Sterling comes walking in. He comes over and sits down with us. And the only team in the league that had shown any interest was the Clippers. Literally, there was no other team that had interest. And Sterling's making a big pitch, saying to me, you and Elgin have got to get together and make this deal work. I need Dominique Wilkins to sell tickets in L.A. and on and on. So he makes his pitch and he leaves. By chance, 10 minutes later, Dominique walks into the restaurant. I wave him over because he was there to play in the All-Star game. And he sits down and I tell him the whole story. I tell him everything Dom Sterling said. I said, they're the only team that shows interest. If we do this, it's going to be the Clippers. We don't want to do it. We'll maintain you as the highest paid player in the franchise every year you're here. And he goes, I understand. Fine. If you have to trade me, whatever. So comes the trade deadline. The day before, we have a home game. After the game, I said to Neek, tomorrow's a trade deadline. I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but if it does, we want to tell you face to face. So be available. And he goes, okay, I'll be available. So next day, the trade deadline was at 9:00 Eastern time. It got to be 6:00 in the evening. Lenny and I were in my office. We hadn't heard a word from Elgin. So we were kind of resigned ourselves to the fact that we'll play it out with Dominique. We're not going to give him a new contract now, but we'll play it out. We have the best record in the East, and we'll see where we are this summer. All of a sudden, like 6:30, the phone rings. It's Elgin. He goes, okay, we'll do the deal. Deadline's only, at 9:00. I promised Neek I'd tell him face to face. I got to go to his house. We didn't have cell phones yet. And so I rushed to his house. His wife answers the door. I tell her exactly why I'm there. She seems to be happy about it because I think she kind of wanted to get out of Atlanta. But she says he's not here, but you can come in and wait for him. Stan Kasten was with me. We go in, we sit in their living room, talk to her for, 45 minutes, an hour. And finally we said, we got to go back and make the conference call. Whenever he gets home, please have him call me. If it's 2:00 in the morning, I'll come over because I gave him my word. I would tell him face to face. She couldn't have been nicer. We go back to the office. We make the deal. Never hear from Dominique. Next morning, Lenny and I are in my office. PR director comes in, Arthur Trish, and he says, hey, turn on ESPN. Dominique's having a national press conference at his house. So we turn it on, and we're watching the press conference, and Nick is saying he's totally shocked. He had no idea this would ever happen. He had been told he'd never be traded. He and I are looking at each other like, what? It's like, are you serious? And then my daughter calls from school because she's watching the press conference. He goes, what's wrong with Dominique Wilkins? You told him all this sitting there at lunch 2 weeks ago. I know. I can't explain it. I don't know. So it was a very eventful situation. I hated the fact we had to trade him, but we had no choice. We won more games after we got Danny than before because Danny was in his prime, and players loved playing with Danny because he distributed and did everything. He scored 20-some points a game, and we finished with the best record in the East. We offered Danny a 5-year deal for $7 million a year or something, like $35 million guarantee. And he signed with Phoenix for a 1-year deal for $1 million because you had a deal in those days where you could sign that, and then the next year you could pay the player whatever you wanted. And so he signed with Phoenix and then signed a big deal afterwards. He made that decision to go. So we were disappointed that Danny didn't stay with us. And at the time, it looked like it was a big setback. However, by Danny not re-signing with us, it freed up enough cap room that we were able to sign Dikembe Mutombo, not right away, but later. So it all worked out. But when you trade your star player, you can't win because if you trade him, you don't get enough for him. If you don't trade him, he's unhappy, if he wants a new deal. So it's like a no-win proposition.
It's a tough one for sure. Do you see Dominique from time to time? How's your relationship these days?
He's great. He's terrific. I saw him this year when I was down in Atlanta. I went to 2 Hawks games while I was down there and talked to him both times, and he couldn't be better. He's great with my grandkids and always very pleasant with me. I get occasionally asked to do a talk show in Atlanta, and they'll ask me about the specifics, and I'll tell them, and then they'll have Dominique on the next day, and Dominique will refute all of it, say, no, that's not how it happened. I don't know why. I just tell people exactly what happened. I mean, it's just, those are the facts, but we get along fine.
I'm pleased to hear that. Now, given that your brother Rob worked for the Timberwolves at this time, how did you negotiate the deal to bring Christian Laettner from Minnesota to Atlanta?
Well, it wasn't real too hard because Flip Saunders was a coach. Kevin McHale was a GM. My brother was the assistant GM. So my brother Rob calls me and he says, hey, Kevin and Flip, their relationship with Laettner is worn out. They're just not getting along. They want to move him. So it came about real quickly. They wanted a center. We had Andrew Lang, who we loved, who was a great person, solid blue-collar center. I wanted Spud as a part of the deal. I think it had to be probably the two of them. I have to go back and look at it, but I'm imagining the two salaries, went together that cap-wise made it work for Laettner. So we make the trade, and we get Laettner for Andrew Lang and Spud Webb. And I'll never forget the press conference. We bring Christian in, and he and I are sitting at the head table answering questions from the media. And they asked him, how do you feel about being in Atlanta? And he says, I'm just happy to be away from Dumb and Dumber. I'm just going like, no. These are the guys my brother works with. It's like, Christian, don't say that. They're also friends of mine too, Flip and Kevin both. But that's Christian, that's just him. He's going to just speak his mind. And he goes on and makes the All-Star team with us.
That's right, 1997, I think it was.
Yeah, it has his best couple of years of his career. And then he got hurt.
Now, you mentioned the great Dikembe Mutombo. You signed Deke as a free agent in July of 96, and his impact obviously was huge. What are your fondest memories, perhaps, of Dikembe that stands out from your time with the great man?
There's so many memories with him. Signing him was just great for the franchise. We had told our fans we needed a shot-blocking center. We needed a defensive presence in the middle, and we got one of the best ever to do it. And then on top of that, even more important, he was a phenomenal person. He was this extra large personality. He was phenomenal in the community. We used to go visit Native American reservations every September, and I would take players and coaches on a volunteer basis all over the country to work with kids using basketball as the vehicle to talk about healthy lifestyle, making good decisions, how to live your dream, those kinds of things. And Dikembe used to like to go. And this one year, he was going to be in the Congo. He was building a hospital in his mother's name. His foundation raised the money to do all this. And he's in the Congo. And he was saying to me, it's going to be hard this year because I got to be in the Congo for this. I said, you always go. You don't worry about it. And he goes, no, I got to find a way to make it work. Well, that year we were going to Montana. He flew from the Congo. He met me in Salt Lake City. We flew together from Salt Lake City up to wherever we flew into in Montana. And he still had a suit on. He's dressed in a business suit. We go to the reservation. And just to make that effort, it was phenomenal. He flew around the world just to go work with these kids for 2 days as a volunteer. One of the crazier things he did, we were in a reservation in North Dakota. It was Steve Smith, Alvan Adams, Dikembe, and me. We would visit with the tribal council, have dinner with them the night before to have them tell us about specific problems their youth were having, things we could address the next day. And Dikembe asked one of the chiefs at the tribal council, could we ride horses while we're here? He said, sure, no problem at all. We'll pick you up early and we'll take you out to a corral and you guys can ride before we go to the reservation school. So sure enough, they pick us up in the morning and there's Alan and Steve, and they've been on a horse in their life. Everybody had a handler holding their horse. So they helped Steve and Alan very gently get up on the horse. They're not sure about any of this. And they're sitting there. Dikembe jumps up on his horse. His legs are so long, he's almost touching the ground. I felt sorry for the horse. He was like straddling his horse. He can't use the stirrups because his feet are literally almost touching the ground. And he's got a cowboy hat on. And Steve and Alan are very cautious and uneasy. And Dikembe's going through this big voice, it's like, what are you guys worried about? There's nothing to this. I rode last year in Mexico. All you do is when you want to go, you just kick your horse. And when you want to stop, you just pull back on the reins and you say, whoa, that's all you have to do. We're inside of a corral, fortunately. He kicks his horse. The horse takes off running around the corral. Dikembe drops the reins totally and is yelling, stop, stop. Alan and Steve are yelling to their handlers, get me off this thing right away. They were scared to death. I'm sitting there on my horse, just shaking my head. And then Dikembe slides off the back of the horse and falls into the fence. Fortunately, he doesn't get hurt. But as that's happening, I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, we're losing our all-star center to a horseback accident. I'll never hear the end of this, And to make it matters worse, inside stuff with Ahmad Rashad, they had a film crew there. So they were filming the whole thing. So I went to him after. I said, you got to delete that film. You cannot show that film of him falling off the horse, please. Fortunately, they deleted that part of it. They left the rest of it in. That's Dikembe. I mean, he's bigger than life, his personality, and a incredible person. Unbelievable.
That's a great story. Thank you. And thanks for sharing the one as well about him flying back from the Congo. Tremendous. And it sums him up. His values and his beliefs align quite strongly to you, I'm sure. And that would have helped develop a kinship between the two of you as well over time.
Yeah, it did. We lived very close to each other. We spent time together. We did a lot of different activities in the community together. He never said no to me. If I said, you want to go do this, go read with these kids, you want to go talk, he never said no. Our whole team was like that. Steve Smith, Grant Long, Tyrone Corbin, all these guys, they were all the same. Phenomenal to work with.
Just in summation, you've made the postseason in 14 of the 15 seasons that you were an NBA GM, which is fantastic. You won 3 division titles, and as you said, the Nuggets went to the conference finals in 1985. Those 1994 Hawks had the best record in the East. And then in the lockout-shortened season in 1999, the Hawks were 31-19.
The lockout season, we played 50 games, finished with 2 games off the best record in the East. We beat a really good Detroit team in the first round. Back then, it was 5-game series, not a 7-game series. We won in the 5th game. Grant Long was like a a warrior in the fifth game, and he willed us to win. I mean, he was just phenomenal. The whole team was, but Grant Long was off the charts. We played the Knicks in the second round, and they beat us, and we hit them at the wrong time. They had Sprewell and Camby and Houston. They were hitting on all cylinders. They just were playing the best they'd played all year, and they went to the finals that year. So we were now owned by AOL Time Warner rather than just Ted Turner. We were basically told, get rid of long-term contracts and bring back short-term deals. And as a basketball staff, we made the mistake of being too emotional, I think. We were so disappointed at losing to New York that we were pretty crushed by it because we really expected to go further than that. But again, we hit them at the wrong time. So we probably made moves we shouldn't have made, but we were pushed to somewhat by ownership to kind of break it up and start over. And it was really premature. We never should have done it. We should have kept that team together for another 4 years anyway. Smitty's knee was banged up, but he still was a very good player. We were forced really to trade Steve Smith, who had a long-term contract, for J.R. Ryder, who had a 1-year deal, just because the contract made sense. My brother, who had been with J.R. in Minnesota, told me not to do it. They absolutely don't do it. That J.R. has more issues than we know how to deal with. And I met with our staff. I handed them a copy of a Sports Illustrated article about J.R. and all the issues he'd had over the years from UNLV into the NBA. I handed a copy to everybody, and then I read it out loud. And I said, I know you all can read, but I want to make a point here. What we're getting, because we're not sociologists, we're not psychiatrists, we're not capable of helping JR with his issues. We're basketball people. As much as we may want to help him, we're not qualified. But we made the deal, and we traded Steve Smith for the anti-Steve Smith, as I tell people. JR luckily turned his life around and is doing great things with kids today, and I admire him from doing that. But, when we had him, it was a disaster, and it just tore apart our locker room. The whole team was being restructured anyway, so that was the beginning of the end of my time there, because all of a sudden we couldn't make the playoffs, so we had no chance of making the playoffs, and we're trying just to survive. And Lenny left and brought Lon Kruger in, and Lon's a great person and a great coach, but nobody was going to win during that time period. 2003, I got fired and moved on from there.
In 2004, your brother Rob was named general manager of the Toronto Raptors. There's a great article which appears on the BabcockHoops.com website. You wrote it, titled Dream Lofty Dreams, which I think is a nod to a quote from a writer that you admire, James Allen.
Uh-huh.
In that article, you wrote that you joined Rob's front office in Toronto as a director of player personnel, but you were almost immediately faced with adversity when the Raptors star Vince Carter was publicly demanding that trade out of Toronto. How did you work on finalizing the deal to trade Vince, the repercussions of his want to leave Toronto?
I told my brother, I said, the Neek never came out and demanded a trade. But I said, if your star player is demanding a trade publicly, you can't win, because it diminishes his trade value. You're not going to get enough for him if you do trade him. If you don't trade him, he's dissatisfied. So we had Wayne Embry on staff, my brother's key advisor, Hall of Famer, as a player and executive, first African-American to be a GM in pro sports. Wonderful person. Jack McCloskey was on our staff, the former general manager of the Detroit Pistons when they won the back-to-back championships. Bob Zuffalato, longtime NBA guy and college coach, was on our staff. So really had a pretty experienced staff. So we did everything we could to try to keep Vince there. He didn't want to listen to it. So coaching staff was getting frustrated because they felt that Vince was being kind of passive-aggressive, like he'd practice every day but not really into it, like you should be. Sam Mitchell would come in, who was the head coach, would come in to Rob's office every day. So you got to get rid of him. He's killing practice. You got to get rid of him. Culminated with, we're playing Seattle Supersonics. We had the ball out of bounds at their end of the floor. We had a timeout. Vince is inbounding the ball. He goes down to inbound the ball and apparently tells the Seattle bench what we're going to run. And the reason we found out about it was the beat writers for Seattle sit right next to the bench. And they wrote about it the next day. We didn't know about it at the time. But the next day they wrote about it, how bizarre this was. So Vince's teammates were upset when they read it. The Toronto coaches were really upset. Not that it would change the outcome of the game. I don't remember what happened, but just the fact that he did it, it was like, okay, he's got to go. Well, the only team that had interest was New Jersey. They had a problem, and they had Alonzo Mourning. Rod Thorne was the GM, and Alonzo was telling Rod, I want to go play for the Miami Heat. I want you to trade Miami. If you don't trade me, I'm going to medically retire. And Alonzo did not have insurance on his contract for some reason. The Nets had not included that, which I don't know why they didn't, because almost everybody's got insurance on the contract. So insurance, if a player's medically disabled, insurance pays 80% of the contract, is how it used to work when I was working in the league. So he didn't have that. So he was threatening them, I'm just going to medically retire. You got to pay me all my money and I'll just go retire. So Rod Thorne was very honest with us. Rod said, we'll trade you Alonzo Mourning and Aaron Williams and Eric Williams. Both the Williams guys are good contributors, and Alonzo's the main guy in the trade, obviously, but he's not going to come play for you. He won't report. So my brother, the way Toronto worked in those days, they had a board that he had to report to. So he had to make a proposal to the board, and he said, okay, here's the deal. We can make this deal, and I'm recommending we do it with one stipulation, that if he won't report, which we're sure he's not going to report, we put him on the suspended list, which means we don't pay him. We don't pay him a penny. As long as he's suspended, we don't pay him any unless he shows up to play. He doesn't make any money. He's going to threaten to medically retire. We think it's an empty threat because he wants to play for Miami. If he medically retires, he can't play for anybody. So the board signed off on it, and they said, all right, we approve it. Go ahead. So we make the deal. Alonzo doesn't report as we expected. He threatens to medically retire. Rob and I fly down to Miami to meet with Alonzo personally, go to lunch with his agent and Alonzo. Very pleasant lunch. We try to encourage him to come play for us. He won't budge. Nothing's resolved. We fly back to Toronto. A short time later, we find out the president of the team in Toronto, can't remember his name right now, but he makes a deal with the agent to buy out his contract. Now, my brother had just told the media his personal philosophy, and the team's philosophy was we were not going to ever pay off a player to not play for us. Okay. He either reports and plays or he's suspended and he makes no money, but we're not going to pay a player to go play someplace else. All of a sudden, the president of the team makes a deal, pays Alonzo off. Alonzo then leaves, clears waivers, signs with Miami, and plays for the Miami Heat. So all of a sudden, my brother is just like raked over the coals by the media, which is understandable because he just finished saying several weeks before that, we'll never pay a player not to play for us. But nobody stood up to back him up. No board member stepped up and said, hey, no, we approved this deal. They just left him hanging out there. And that was kind of the beginning of the end of our stay in Toronto. That's the NBA. I mean, that's, that we're not the only ones that have gone through those kinds of things. And so, we all got fired after middle of our second year there.
I didn't know a lot of that information there about how all that went down behind the scenes. So that's quite enlightening, to say the least.
Yeah. I've talked to Vince, years later when he finished his last playing days were with the Hawks. He had matured greatly and was terrific. I mean, unbelievable, like a different person. But when he was with us, he was just not a happy person at that time. And we tried to make him happy. We just couldn't get him there.
And now in 2006, after thinking that your NBA career was nearing its end, you received a call from the Cleveland Cavaliers. You ended up spending 10 seasons with the Cavs, which culminated with the 2016 NBA championship. How special was that long-awaited moment to reach the NBA's Mount Olympus after all those years in the NBA there, Pete?
Well, it shows you how hard it is to win a ring. I spent 42 years, and it was the year that I got a ring. So it's not easy to do, and I admire people who do it more than once because it's just getting there is really difficult. But it was a great ride. We obviously rode the coattails of LeBron and Kyrie and Kevin Love and Richard Jefferson and Tristan Thompson and that whole group. It was a remarkable group, and it was fun to be involved with it, obviously.
Did you have a favorite moment or game that you're associated with the team there that really stands out above anything else?
I think the most remarkable game emotionally was LeBron's return to Cleveland. I like to tell people he took a several-year vacation to the beach in Miami, and then came back to Cleveland. But when he returned, we played the New York Knicks opening night, and Nike had filmed this commercial. I don't know if you remember it, but it was in the streets of Cleveland, and like all these fans that were like following LeBron and all coming to the. It was a phenomenal, emotional commercial that they shot, and they used that in the pregame. I remember calling my wife later and telling her that there was more emotion in that game than any finals game that I'd ever been to. It was incredible. And LeBron, the only time I've ever seen him nervous in my life, and just being around him, I was with him prior to Miami and then after Miami. The only time I ever saw him nervous, and he played awful. He turned the ball over, he bounced the ball off his foot, and we lost to the Knicks in that opening game. Like he was an emotional wreck in a way, but there was so much emotion, it was overwhelming. And that game's always stood out to me as being like just off the charts, incredible. Because the fans were so pumped up and excited about him being back. And when they did that Nike commercial on the pregame on the big screens, the place just went crazy.
Were you awarded a championship ring, and where's it located at the moment?
Sitting right over here on, hold a second. Yeah, I wear it every once in a while, special occasions. They give you this nice display case that goes in. I don't know who designed it, but there's a story behind so much of it. Let me get this.
Oh, man.
So
wow.
There's 100 diamonds on the top that represent 100 playoff wins. There's 46 on the edges that represent 46 years the franchise existed. Every player's number is on this ring around it with a diamond in between. All the players' numbers are on it. Then 2016, the 0 has got the logo in it instead of the 0 because the area code of Cleveland is 216.
Oh, how cool is that?
Yeah. And then Ohio, the state of Ohio has 11 diamonds in it because Dan Gilbert owned the team for 11 years. And then on the bottom is the 7 games of the finals. The diamonds are the losses and the garnets are the wins. So we lose the first 2 games. People write us off. We win game 3 and a little bit of chance maybe game 4. And now nobody's done it in the history of the NBA in the finals. Come back from a 3-1 deficit and we win the last 3 games. It was worth the wait. 42 years.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, they did a great job with it. So I break it out for special occasions and things and wear it, but it sits in this display case most of the time.
Well, thank you for showing us. That's really cool to see that as a way to wrap things up. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you for this amount of time, Pete. We mentioned your brothers, Rob and Dave. The 3 of you have amassed almost close to a century in combined NBA involvement, which is incredible. Is there anything else you'd like to mention about the Babcock family that we hadn't discussed yet in closing?
I was just really fortunate to do something I love to do for all those years and live my passion, and also get to do it with my brothers because they have the same passion. We got to work in the same business, travel together because, we're all scouting the same players. Probably once a month we make a trip together where we meet on the road, and it's just a great family experience for us as well as professional. My brother Dave still works for the Bucks today, director of player personnel. Been with them for, 25 years, won a ring a few years ago. So when we get together, we compare rings and
Yours must look better, does it?
Yeah,
surely.
I think so, but he thinks his looks better. But that's brotherly competition. But we've all been very fortunate to do something we love to do. Couldn't be better.
No, it's tremendous. Well, it's a great way to wrap things up. And thanks so much for chatting with me today, Pete.
Absolutely, Adam. Anytime, happy to do it.
Thanks for listening. I welcome your interaction with the show. Tap the microphone icon on my website to send me a voicemail. You can suggest discussion topics or guests you'd like to hear conversations with. I've recently realized after many years, I've misinterpreted the metrics available through Apple Podcasts. If you've listened this far into the episode but have never added a rating or review before, please consider doing so. It's much appreciated. Now, here are the actual show stats, courtesy of Apple, as of early August 2025. Worldwide, the show has 221 ratings and 93 reviews, with an average of 4.7 stars. Ratings and reviews have come from the following countries: United States, Australia, United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, Brazil, China, Denmark, France, Germany, Ireland, Latvia, Poland, Russia, Slovenia, Spain, and Taiwan. Hopefully I haven't omitted any countries by mistake. Thanks for your continued support. If you had a review, I'd love to read it out in a future episode. Your ratings and reviews are one of the best ways to support the podcast. If you enjoy the show, please tell your basketball-loving friends about it. Word-of-mouth recommendations are truly worth their weight in gold. Stay up to date with my podcast and subscribe to my free NBA history newsletter. You'll receive exclusive details on upcoming episodes, future guests to appear on the show, and more. Sign up via my website or simply email me, inallairness@gmail.com. You can follow my show in various ways. Search In All Airness, 3 words, on your listening app of choice. The show is available on most platforms. Check the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with a great range of guests. Join me next time for another edition of the show.